About 12, 13 years ago, I bought, I think it was the original model of the Silhouette brand Cameo computer-controlled textile cutting machine. This is not it. This is the latest version, the Cameo 5, but the one I still own is the regular Cameo. I don't even think it's called Cameo 1. It's just called Cameo. Anyway, I bought that specifically to do some cutting of precision labels and tags and markers and things like that for the museum I volunteer at. We'd lined the front of all of the shelving in the storage rooms with a strip of like 2-inch wide Velcro, and then had all these photo tags of what all the artifacts look like if they weren't in their protective cases. And they had the catalog numbers and everything on there, the other information, and you knew exactly what belonged on the shelf and what it looked like without having to open up a case, for example. And so a lot of things had to be cut out, and those could just be cut out with a regular paper shear because they were rectangular. But there were also a lot of extra markers, like this particular one's been removed to a temporary display. This one needs to go on the truck at the next exposition we do. All sorts of extra markers. And those were circles with codes on them, and they were color coded as well. And it's kind of a pain to cut out circles, so we did it that way because there's these ready-made Velcro dots that are, I don't know what they are, they're like 3/4 of an inch in diameter or something, 5/8 perhaps, and we wanted those to be used with these tags. So anyway, so I needed something that had a graphics application where I could design the graphics, the colors, the text, whatever, and then print it out to a color laser printer on print-to-last paper, the laser printable plastic, and then have all those little dots cut out for me and precisely so they would fit the Velcro dots nice and clean. Anyway, so it was things like that, and I would call that industrial cutting. It's not machines like this, the Silhouette brand, and also the Cricut brand has all their different Cricut products that are widely used by arts and crafts people. And they're making, I call them the hearts or puppy dogs and cupcakes crowd, and that's fine. If you're into that, great, and the machines are really useful. And I did a whole thing. I wrote 2 reviews because I own both machines. I compared them in depth, wrote a big review, again, this is 12, 13 years ago, on what exactly their capabilities were, why you would pick one over the other. And I actually said I thought for crafting the Cricut product might be a little better, but for industrial cutting, in other words, you're not using pre-made shapes. You want to do exactly what you want to do, and you want to do it precisely. And the shapes are going to be more geometric. Not a lot of curves probably, unless they're circles. I thought that the software that Silhouette had was much better for that. You could put in X and Y coordinates and things like that and get exactly the shapes you wanted. It's certainly much easier. And anyway, so I did those projects, and then I didn't have a use for it for all those years, and now I had a bunch of things to use it for, and I found that the Silhouette company that I dealt with back then, which was very easy to get a hold of if you had questions, tech support, whatever, sales questions. Now that what they have now is not even a shadow, in my experience. I found it almost impossible to get answers. I'm not sure what their staff is like. Maybe they only have one person, probably highly overworked. Anyway, that's a whole different issue. But I was trying to learn how to use the new things, and I had to buy the new machine because the current software doesn't seem to support the old machine I have. So I had to pop for the new machine. And I may do another video on the machine itself, but today's video is about what I learned in using the current version of Silhouette's design software, which is the Silhouette Studio Designer Edition. That's just the Silhouette Studio software, which is free, and then you pay a few bucks and you get a code which you put into the regular program, and it enables a bunch of extra functions. You can also upgrade it to like a business edition and things like that, but I'm just dealing with the Silhouette Studio 5 Designer Edition, and that's what the purpose of this video is. But I had to give this preamble so you know where I was coming from on it. Now, I actually did a lot of exploration. I studied a lot of YouTube videos where there's a lot of people, at least several main ones, who give a lot of tips and tricks and instructional videos on using the Silhouette software and machines. But there are very few that deal with the Cameo 5, and the ones that do, at least for my needs, were too superficial, and hardly any that were dealing with Studio 5. Most of them dealt with older versions of the software, which had a lot of differences to them. So I figured out a lot of stuff myself just by trial and error. And since I haven't been able to corroborate what I learned with Silhouette, in other words, they might say, well, yeah, that works, but that's the hard way. There's an easier way. I haven't had that corroboration with Silhouette on the things I'm going to have in this video. It's just things I figured out. And to that end, I made my own Silhouette Studio 5 Designer Edition quick tips, or quick guide and tips. These are just things I figured out, and it's 5 pages. And rather than stumble around through this video, I'm going to pretty much be reading this like a script. And hopefully then I cover everything. Now, this particular project, and you can see all these sketches I have here, I'm helping with the development of a little piece of vintage electronics, pseudo or faux vintage electronics. So it could have been vintage, except it wasn't. It's designed now, and it's for an upcoming vintage computer festival. And it's a product that has some LEDs in a binary pattern in 2 banks with 2 push-button switches, and it needs something to identify the LEDs, so it's easier to figure out what the numbers are they're representing. And it's a timekeeper, so I have hours and minutes on it, and it's round shaped, and this is just a prototype. You can see I had a bit of a collision there with the number 32 and a hole for one of the switches. I needed to make some small adjustments. So this isn't the current design, but this just gives you an idea. If you were to try to do this in Cricut, you'd probably have a much harder time than it would be to do it in the Silhouette Studio environment. Not to say you couldn't do it, but I think the Silhouette Studio is still better at designing this kind of thing. Now, the final thing isn't going to be paper. It's going to be printing on clear plastic, and the objective is to be able to see all the electronics behind it and see the LEDs. So you have to have it be see-through. It's going to be like overhead projector transparency paper, but there's some Avery 8.5 by 11 inch sheets of laser printable clear plastic, which I plan to use. And it'll have a pattern similar to this, and I bought a cartridge of white toner for my color laser printer, and I'm going to put that in there and then print the sheets, and then you'll get this same pattern, but it'll be white text on clear. And because the background of the circuitry is all dark, the plan is that that white text should be showing up very legibly on top of the dark circuit board. It's a black circuit board with black ICs on it. This is all still experimental. We haven't seen the final thing yet. But anyway, so this is the goal of this particular thing, that you're going to see it on and off as I go through the software. This image will be on the screen a lot, so just a bit of explanation. Okay, so once you've got the Silhouette Studio software downloaded from the Silhouette America website, and you've upgraded it to Designer Edition, otherwise some things are going to look different. So you run the application from the shortcut. This current version of the software is trying to sell you stuff. You can buy patterns and products, particular transfer papers and stickers and things like that onto which you can print and cut. And I realized already I skipped something. I was describing making something like this, and so it's not just printing. You have to run your design through a laser printer to get the image on the media, and then you feed that printed piece of paper into the cutting machine, and then run the same software but for cutting instead of printing, and it will use registration marks that it printed previously, and then the cutting machine will synchronize to those registration marks so it knows where everything has been printed, and then it will go through with its computer controlled knife and cut them out, and including even those little circular cutouts. That's what this machine does, but it isn't a printer, it's just the cutting part. And so the entire process is called print and cut. So if you see that, that's what it's referring to when you're first sending the design to a printer, and then taking the result of that and putting it in this machine, and sending just the cutting information to this machine so it can do its part of the process. Alright, so you end up with a screen that looks like this where they're trying to sell you stuff. And up here in the right hand corner are the different environments you can be in. There's design, there's library where you can get designs that other people have done, and then there's send, which is how you send things to the cutting machine. Just to do the printing part, you send them directly from the design application. So I'm going to start out by saying make sure that the design tab is selected. So I'm going to do that now. And you end up with this environment. And if you've done any computer graphics, this doesn't look too foreign. This would be the same if you're doing, for example, 3D printing or something. You end up with a workspace that's defined by the dark gray object there with a grid on it. That's the maximum size, and by default I've got this set up for an 8.5 by 11 object. So it represents an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that's placed in the upper left hand corner of the cutting mat. So that's what we're looking at here. And then there's a bunch of tools along the top, and there's a context dependent bar here, which no matter whatever you've got selected at the moment, it will change what's in this area to things that are pertinent to the object you've selected. And then there's a bunch of creation tools along the left, and there's a ruler for horizontal, and over on the right there's a ruler for vertical. And then there's a bunch of other tools along the right side. Now you can reposition these, I believe. I haven't tried doing it, but I think since it's a Windows app, mostly you can move toolbars and palettes and things around in most Windows apps, so you can probably do it here too. I didn't see it mentioned in the manual at all, and I haven't played with it, but that's the basic environment we're dealing with here. So, in the designer environment, you want to start out with the page setup panel, and that's way up here in the upper right hand corner. It looks like a sheet of paper with the corner folded over. And so you get this pop-up, and it's called a panel in the environment Studio has. It's referred to as a panel. So this is the page setup panel, and there's a guide you can read if you want to, but you're basically telling the software what type of machine you're going to be working with and the size of media. In other words, in this case, a piece of paper. So I've got it selected to my machine. It's Cameo 5. I've got feed type selected to auto. I've got the cutting mat auto. I've got the media size selected to letter. That's 8.5 by 11, but If you're putting something else in there, then you would change this accordingly. You can also customize it. You can make your own. Right now it's set to 8.5 by 11 just because I selected it up here. But if there's a size that isn't up here already, you can drag this around and customize the media size by setting length and width. The cutting mat by default is 12 inches by 12 inches, but that isn't the limit of it because machines like the Cameo 5 can print on rolls of material where, you know, you could print out, or you could print or cut a large strip of something that's much more than 12 inches in one direction. But most things you're probably working with a 12 by 12 mat, so I'm not going to be changing that here. You can constrain the media to the cutting mat. That's selected by default, and that's probably where you want it. You can select a portrait or a landscape orientation, and you can select things like transparency and colors. I'm not going to worry about that here, but these are options. You can also rotate the view. Another part of the page setup panel is this part here. It goes to this by default, but you can click on this and it changes it to a grid setup. So you can show cut borders, you can set all these check boxes, you can set up a grid if you want to work off of a grid, and that's not referring to the grid in the work area here. It's a grid that's going to constrain what you're designing to the grid, and you can show the grid, you can show guides, you can show the ruler, you can set up things, you can set up the tolerance, and then you can go to additional grid settings. So there's a lot of things with the grid. I have not used the grid, so I'm not going to go into that here, but this is where you would mess with the grid if you wanted to use it. Okay, so probably the next thing you'd want to do once you've closed that particular panel is find the 8th icon down from the top on the right side of the screen, which looks like a piece of paper with registration marks at the 3 corners. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Looks like that. That's exactly what the registration marks look like that will be printed when you do the print and cut. And again, this video is about the print and cut process specifically, not other modes of operation that you can use the software and or machine for. So you want to select that, and you get the print and cut panel, and you want to enable registration marks with the checkbox, and that'll put them automatically on here. And you could position the registration marks and change them, but you really should use the defaults if at all possible. And there's more settings you can pull up. You can restore it back to the defaults. You can enable print bleeding and a bleed radius. These are more advanced features that I'm not going to go into here. I'm just trying to point out that if you're going to do print and cut, you really need to have the registration marks turned on. Now if I go and click this, you'll see that it's put these marks, a little square at the upper left, an L-shaped at the upper right, and another L-shaped at the lower left. And it puts a crosshatch pattern on here, which is an area you shouldn't try to put any of your design. If you get it too close to that, the machine might inaccurately or falsely try to register to the design you've got instead of to the design mark. So this is like a no man's land that you don't want to put anything in. I've turned it back off. Now if you're doing a cut-only process, again that's not what the video is about, but if you were doing a design that isn't doing any printing, only cutting, then you don't need the registration marks. That's why there's even an option to not have it. Now going forward from here, again for industrial type designs, not your cupcakes and puppy dogs type of design, but where you're dealing with more regular geometric patterns, lines, rectangles, circles, ellipses, polygons, things like that, you're going to use this pretty much like a CAD software, and I presume most people who are going to do this type of stuff have already got some exposure to using some sort of a CAD program. And aspects of CAD program appear into all sorts of things, various graphics programs, desktop publishing programs, other things like that that presumably most viewers have some experience with. So I'm not going to explain the whole method of using computer-aided drafting or CAD. So when you're putting things on here, unlike a CAD package where you can do freehand things, but mostly you're going to deal with XY coordinates, in this software you cannot use XY coordinates when initially drawing lines, rectangles, circles, ellipses, etc. However, once you've drawn them, just to get them on the screen, their shapes and sizes can be manually entered. So once they're in the workspace, you can select the shape and size and position, so you have to work at it from that way. Do a freehand draw of the object initially and then adjust the parameters for shape, characteristics, dimensions, position, color, etc. The basic objects are way over here on the left side. At the top of the left menu is this arrow. That's a common icon for selecting an object. So if you just want to select something, you make sure this tool is highlighted first. If you want to select things by drawing a lasso around them, then you can use this tool. It looks like a lasso. Now in this version of the software, it should give you a little pop-up explanation if you hover the mouse over it, and I found that it works a lot of the time and sometimes doesn't work. It might leave you guessing. If you want to stipulate the endpoints of something, you can use this tool. Or draw two endpoints, you can draw lines or connected lines, either straight or curved, using this tool. This one allows you rectangles with curved corners, ellipses or circles or polygons. And this would be regular polygons. Notice the word regular there. In other words, polygons where all sides are the same length. This tool here is for freehand drawing. Freehand it says. This is for putting in text. This is for drawing a note. And I haven't played with that, but I'm presuming that's a note that isn't actually going to appear in the final design, but maybe it does. Anyway, this is the note tool. There's an eraser tool where you can just erase things, or portions of things. Like you could draw something and then erase part of it. There's a knife here where you can have say you had a 5-sided polygon, but your design only requires 4 sides of that polygon, so you could draw the 5-sided polygon just to get the general shape, then you could use the knife tool to cut out the part you don't want or need in your design. And then finally, if you're dealing with colors, you can, or pretty much any property, if you've got one object already drawn and it has particular properties like line thickness, line color, whether it's a cut object or not, its fill color, all those types of things, and you've created a new object and you want to have it just like the first one, you can use this tool to grab the properties of one shape and copy them to another shape. When you're drawing lines and you want them to be purely horizontal or purely vertical, instead of going at some angle, you hold down the Shift key while you're dragging the mouse to draw the line, and that'll force it to be horizontal or vertical. A lot of other CAD programs use the Control key for that, so it's not like it's a universal way of doing it, but this particular program you used the Shift key for that. Let's just take a polygon here. So I select it, the tool changes to look like a polygon, and I'm going to draw my polygon here. I just freehanded it just to get the polygon on the screen. Now I'm going to go over here and select, so I've got the select tool, and I can click the polygon and you can see the border drawn around it, and you can don't click the border itself, you click the object and then you can drag it around to a new position. There's this slider here where you can change the number of sides. You can grab the little round tool and you can see the icon changes to a circle and a curve, so you can use that to rotate the object. And you can, drag the corners of it to resize it. But since it's a regular polygon, it's not going to change to a different shape when you move these tools. It's just going to make it larger, smaller, rotate it, that type of thing. You can see there's actual dimensions on here. This is 4.133 inch. And by the way, you can change this so it works in millimeters, but it seems to default to inches. But you can't change those dimensions here. There's no way to do it. Matter of fact, if you try clicking it, it deselects the object. And you can see here on that slider it's saying at the moment we've got 5 sides to the polygon. This slider isn't available on most objects, but for polygons it makes sense to have it. So again, if you want to change these dimensions, we'll get to that later, but that's how you would just create an object no matter what it is. If you did have a grid on here and it was turned on, then when you're dragging the mouse, you could have it snap to the grid, and thereby, again, for certain types of layouts, a grid could be handy. For other types, it can be a real pain and just get in your way. Now, I want to point out, while we've got the polygon selected here, this context-sensitive bar's got all sorts of stuff in it now. This one is for fill, so you could fill in the polygon, and if it has a crosshatch, that means it's clear or unselected. In this case, it means no colors selected, but if I went in here and selected it to green, you'll see that the polygon gets filled with green. But if you look really closely, I'm not sure my camera will focus, but the outline of that polygon is red. And that's because this other tool here, this is for the outline, that is currently selected to red. Now I'm going to go back here and select this back to nothing. And we're back to this. And it now shows that instead of green, it's got this crosshatch. Now I want to mess with the line. You can see that it is red here. It's easier to see when there isn't a green fill. I can go here and change the line to blue, and sure enough it's changed the line to that color, and it shows that it's currently selected to blue up here. I'm going to change it back to red. It also allows you to use the eyedropper to copy colors from somewhere else. Now it is handy with the lines because this is ultimately a cutting oriented piece of software, and the Cameo machine is definitely a cutting machine, so you have to be able to stipulate things you want to cut, and that involves lines and shapes as well. You don't have to cut every graphical object you put in your design, and you don't have to, you can print without cutting, and you can cut without printing. You have both ways of doing it, or you can print something and cut it. It is possible, and actually preferable in my view, to color code your outlines. And that's good as long as you're not actually trying to have a graphical outline where the outline itself is visible and important in the way something looks. Now you'll notice here that the line is currently selected to 0 thickness. That means it's something which can only be cut, not printed. If you try printing this, this polygon will not appear because that line, this line looks like a thin line here, but if you actually printed it, because it's an infinitesimally small line or thin line, it wouldn't actually print. This is a line that tells the machine that you want to cut that shape. And if you wanted to make it visible, you can go over here and use this tool. I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong tool. This tool is for changing the style of line. You can make it dashed and so on. And that can even influence the way it cuts. There might be times when you want to cut something with a perforation to it, and you could do that here. Normally you'd want it to be just a solid line. And here's where you can change the thickness of it. Or you can use the arrows, or you can just select it and type in a new value. But you can see here the line got a lot thicker. So I'm going to just change this back to 0 because I want it to be just a cut line. And it returned to the thin line. There's other lines here relating to the size of it. Right now it's got an overall height of 4.133 inches and a width of 4.320 inches, and that's just because of its particular orientation here. If I take it and drag it in a circle or rotate it, it doesn't actually change it because those are the dimensions that are in these boxes here, and that's just because a polygon's overall dimensions are going to be different if it's a 5-sided polygon. If I change this to a 6-sided one, for example, you'd see a different story, but there's no way that this dimension here is going to be the same as this dimension on a 5-sided polygon. So these are just that way, and here you can lock the coordinates or unlock them. That's the aspect ratio of the part. And here's if you want to move it around. Right now it's set to a distance of 0.125 inches, and you could use these arrows to move things around by that amount. So if I'm using the down arrow, for example, I can move it around by that fixed amount, and you can type in a different dimension or drag the slider to do that. Now this is the position up here, the X and Y position of the object. If I just grab the object and drag it around, it doesn't actually change it while you're looking at it, unfortunately. It waits till you've stopped moving it, then it updates those. But that's your X and Y position. And you might say, well, this is an irregular object here, or at least it's not a point. When we're giving it an X and Y position, what are we referring to? The center of it? The left-hand corner? What are we referring to? And that's what this little tool up here is for. At the moment, we're going by the upper left-hand corner, and its position, X and Y, is shown here. If I selected the center of it, you'd see that it changes again. So that's what those tools are used for. This tool that I think looks like a little bar graph is for alignment. You can have multiple things selected and change them to left alignment, center alignment, right alignment, top, center, bottom alignment. This tool is center to page. So if I click that button, it moves the object to the center of the page. And that a very useful tool. You can also group and ungroup shapes. If you've selected more than one shape, you can group and ungroup them with these tools. If you have things in layers, you can bring the selected item in front of all other objects that it might be overlaid with. You can move it to the back, you can bring it towards the front, you can bring it towards the back. These are conventional tools in any graphics program. You can do offsetting. You can duplicate a selected item. And you can delete the selected item. So that's all the tools for a polygon. And you can kind of see how you can manipulate it in many ways. Now, I showed how to use some of these tools in the context-sensitive bar there. There's also more elaborate versions of those tools over on the right. So once again, in order to change something, we have to select it. So we have to make sure the select tool here is highlighted. Once we've selected an object, we can start using these panels on the right-hand side. Some of them look familiar, like this kind of bar graph tool. It's a more elaborate version of what was up here. So this one here is called the transform panel. And if you select that, yes, it has these, align to left, center right, top, center, bottom. You can distribute a number of things to have a equal horizontal spacing between two defined borders, or equal spacing between two borders in the vertical direction. So those are extra things you can do. You can center two different kinds of centering, but that's just the basic tool in the transform panel here. You can also go over to here and go to scaling, or you can scale by some 33%, 50%, 100, 200, 300. You can change it to a slider based scale, or type in any number you want over here and then apply it. You can actually type in the dimensions here. This is the thing I was saying before. You can't directly affect those right on the design surface, but you can through the use of these other tools. So you've got this object selected, and right now their aspect ratio is locked, so if I change one, the other one will change along with it to maintain the same shape. But I could drag the sliders, I could change one of these dimensions, and again, since it's locked, the other one will change proportionally. But I can also unlock it by clicking on that, and now I can change them independently, and that would change this from a regular polygon to an irregular polygon in this instance. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to turn this back to locked. But that gives you that flexibility. And over here I'd said you could drag this green dot around to rotate it. There's a more sophisticated version of that in here. You can rotate it 0, 90, 180, 270 degrees, or a custom rotation. You can rotate it by 45, 90. This is rotating to an angle. This is rotating by an angle. So let's say I want to rotate this polygon that I've rotated by hand. I want to go up here and rotate it to 0. Boom. I could rotate that to 90, 180, 270, back to 0. And I can rotate it by, for example, 45 degrees. Or 90 degrees, 180 degrees, go back 90 degrees, go back 45 degrees, or a custom rotating amount, and then apply it. I can also go up here and do a move, and this is like using the separate move tool up here, but now it's pertinent to the transform panel. I can move it by a specific amount, a distance, left, right, up, down. I can move it to a particular XY coordinate, and that XY coordinate is relative to the point I've selected here. Is it going by the upper left-hand corner, the center, the right, you know, all those different things. And then finally apply. And finally, at least for some objects, you can shear it. So you can make it lean to one side. Right now it's 0, but what if I make it shear minus 15 degrees? Minus 30 degrees. Same thing for shearing it to the right. You can also do a custom shear, put in a number you want. I can shear it vertically or horizontally the same way. So this is a vertical shear. And I can show shear handles if I want to. Now it's put in these little extra tools. I can turn the shear handles back off. So that's the transform tool. Another tool that you need to use a lot besides the transform tool is the modify panel. It looks like a square and a circle. This lets you do things like when you've got a square and a circle and you've positioned them, you could weld them together so they become one object. They're no longer a square and a circle, now they're a shape inspired by the original square and circle. Or you could take ones that have been welded together and undo it essentially. Or you could say, I've already got a welded object and now I want to subtract a circular shape out of it, even if that circle wasn't part of it originally. So you've got all these different things you can intersect, divide, crop, all sorts of things. Compound path, detached lines, releasing, and a lot of these things have a bit of explanation that pops up if you hover the mouse over it for long enough. Unfortunately, a lot of the ones they seem to have forgotten the explanations. That's what I found, but most of them seem to work. You can also use the fill panel. That's very much like the fill that was back here on the object or the context sensitive toolbar. So you can change the palette. You can even put down here, you can put in various formats of color. You could put in a hex value. You can put in HSL or RGB. You can have a color specified at various transparency levels. You can just pick from this. You can create a new palette if you want. You can do a fill gradient where it changes from one color to another across the width of the object or across the height or diagonally. You can fill it with a pattern like a crosshatch or checkers or whatever you want. So a lot of graphical control here, similar to what we had up here, but with more capability. You can also mess with the line types up here like we could in the context sensitive, but there will be more options here. If you have a graphical object that's been imported here just for reference, and then you want to trace a new shape around it, you could use the trace panel. Now I haven't played with that, but I know what it does, and that's what it's used for. There's this thing that looks like a bunch of ellipses overlaid. This allows you to replicate something. So you could duplicate something just to the left of the original, or just to the right, or just below, just above. You can make rows and columns of an object that you've already selected, or you can fill the page with the same object that you've already designed. You want to make a bunch of them, and this will automatically arrange them to fill the page with those. You can mirror an object, up, down, left, right. You can rotate the copies by particular numbers of degrees, various things. So a lot of that stuff. There's this extra part of the tool here. This is Advanced Replicate, where you put in the number of copies, how much you want to position each copy, and then apply it. And then you've got this tool, which is Object on Path, where you can stipulate that you want to replicate objects following a predefined path, which you set up here. So again, lots of power in the graphical department. Your text panel is here. I'll get to that later. This is the offset panel. Already touched on that. There's some specialty tools in this panel. I haven't played with those, but that's where they're at. Image effects. Pop-up panels. Again, a whole lot of stuff that can be explored here. Nesting, rhinestones. This one doesn't have a pop-up explanation. I don't know what it does. Neither does this one. Oh, it's a warp panel. You can warp things. Anyway, so a bunch of powerful tools there along the right-hand side for modifying objects that you've already created using the basic drawing tools over on the left-hand side and in conjunction with the context-sensitive bar that I've already looked at. Alright, let's move into text objects here. So we're going to create a text object by going over here on the left side and clicking the text tool, and the context sensitive bar now has fill color, line type, just like it did for other things, line thickness, but now you can specify the font and bold, italics, underlined, left, center, right, or uniform width justification, and a bunch of the other tools that are common to most objects. So I click here and it gives me a prompt, and I just put in test, and because it almost always, if not always, defaults to assuming you're just going to do cutting, not printing, I'm going to press Control A to select the whole thing, and I'm going to say I'm not cutting this. So there's an option right here. It's like a small piece of a crosshatch, and I'm going to change the outline to let's just make it black. So now the outline of the text is changed to black, and I can fill that. Now if I select it, it comes up with its dimensions, X and Y. I can go over here and select fill, and I'm going to fill it with black as well. So now it looks like that. Again, it's important to always bear in mind that when it comes time to send instructions to the cutting machine, the Cameo 5 in this case, you can stipulate what to cut according to the color of its outline. Since I've got black text here, I chose a black outline for it, and that can be key to make sure there's no confusion to the machine whether it's supposed to cut something or not. If you just want text that doesn't get cut but is just there for the visual aspect of it, then you can go in here and make sure that you know the color of the outline, and then stipulate that color is not to be cut when it comes time to cutting. And of course we can go up here and change it to bold, change it back. You don't actually have to select the text, just select the text object to do that. I could do a Control A to select all, but it's not really necessary because it can only be text in that object. I can make it italics. I can underline it. You can justify it different ways, etc. So that's the basic way you do text. And of course, a lot of these tools over to the right will still apply to it somehow. If you want to start combining features, for example, or duplicating the object, grouping the text with other things, centering it, changing its justification, moving it front to back in between other objects in a virtual stack, all that can be done here. Now, I didn't really cover this before, but at the upper left of the screen and in this ribbon here are additional tools which are not related to the particular object you're dealing with. This is the home screen, looks like a little house. This is creating a new design. It says drawing here, but it's really a new design. Opening an existing design, saving the design, printing the design. That's for the print portion of it before you go to cut it. And again, if you're going to do a print and cut operation, you got to make sure you put the registration marks on as already covered. But you could use this software just to design graphics and never plan to cut it out at all, in which case you can just disregard any of the functions of this software that deal with cutting and just design graphics and then just use this to print it out. That's a perfectly legitimate thing to do with the software. There's a cut tool, copy tool, paste tool. These three things are just the same as the hotkeys you can use in Windows. Like Control X is cut, Control C is copy, Control V is paste. All those hotkeys still work. Control A to select all. Those still work, or you can use these tools. There's the undo and redo tools up here. This is selecting all objects, deselecting them, selecting objects by color. Maybe you want to select all the things that are red, so you can do that. Zooming on here normally is done with the plus and minus magnifying glasses here. You can also drag a box around a bunch of objects and thereby select everything that the box surrounds. You can zoom in and out using the mouse, which normally doesn't work unless this tool is applied. You can pan using the mouse, or you can also pan by dragging these sliders horizontal and vertical. And you can also re-pan, re-zoom to fit everything in your design into the window. So those are all tools that are up there. Now, I already mentioned this, but I'm going to mention it again because it's very important. It can be very useful to color code objects according to their purpose. For example, lines that are intended to be cut only might have red outlines, just for example. And things that are supposed to be printed only might be given another color for outline and or fill, another color distinct from red, in other words, something besides red. It doesn't really matter what colors you use as long as you have distinctions for what the colors mean. For example, with text, the outline is not important unless you've selected the outline to be really thick. But by default, and I'm going to reselect my text here, by default, the line thickness is 0. which is normally what it would be if you're going to cut it out. So if you turned the outline off here, I don't even know if it's an option. Doesn't seem to be, actually. But if you were to turn the outline off, it wouldn't change the way the object looks. So I could go in here and say I want to color code this black text with a red outline because I want to have it cut. And I want to select it along with other things that are also red that will be cut. So I could do that. And here on the screen, if I zoom it in, it's just possible, and the camera may not pick it up, but there's a really, really fine red outline around this text. You would never see that if you were to print it out. It's essentially got a thickness of 0, but it is visible here just barely on the design screen. But because it has a red outline now, if I selected my polygon, which has a red outline, and I selected all red outlines are supposed to be cut, then the text would be cut out along with it. But if I said, hey, you know, this is black text, it isn't going to hurt me to have a black outline to go with it. Now if I don't select the color black to be cut when it comes time to cut, then there's no way the cutter is going to try to cut out this text. It's just going to leave it as a graphical object that was printed but won't be cut out. So I did want to stress that. There's also supposed to be the option to work with layers in here and designate layers to be cut or printed only or both. I have not figured out how to do that yet, and I did not see it described in the documentation other than just brief mention of it. So I'm not really sure if that's possible or not. I've been doing my designs using the outline colors to designate cutting or not cutting. Now supposedly, if you had a problem with a design and you can't figure it out, you're supposed to be able to send the design directly to the Silhouette company for their people to look at it and try to comment on what you did wrong or how to accomplish something. If you go into the File menu up here and go down here, Send to Silhouette, that's an option, or you can use Control-L, and that would send your design to Silhouette. I'm not sure anybody actually comments on it. Based on my experience with them recently, they have essentially no tech support or customer service or anything. If you call them at their number, you just get a recording. Doesn't matter what time of day or day of the week. You just get a recording saying, use the chat or use, email support at silhouetteamerica.com. And I found that the only time I got a response to an email was several weeks later, and then it wasn't even a useful response. I guess it's either somebody who just doesn't know the answers, or they're so overworked that they're just tearing through stacks of comments and not really giving them their due consideration. Maybe some combination of those. It may be an AI bot. Maybe they don't have any live people there doing this, and they're trusting to some AI thing. They drank the Kool-Aid, as I call it, believing that AI will just do all their work and they can lay everybody off. I don't know. But certainly the AI, or the chat, when I've tried using it, most of the time it doesn't even respond. But when it does, it always seems to be from the same person, which has a name that doesn't sound like a name that a person would have. It's like those Chinese companies that are just a jumble of letters that don't seem to make any name. And I wouldn't be surprised if they just bought some cheap AI bot to do their chat for them. And I have a couple times found where it found some boilerplate text and put that in a response, which I could have got the same thing by searching on their website and finding the same thing. and it's still useless. And if you ask back, say, I'm not quite clear on that, that thing you sent me is something I already knew, and it confused me, I need help with this part of it, you won't get a response. Certainly I didn't, and I doubt anybody else is different in this regard. You may notice here that this polygon doesn't seem to be precisely square. I have no idea how it got that way. But yeah, it seems to be very slightly rotated on here. I don't even know the best way to correct that except to go in, you know, to the modify panel and just try to bump it a little bit. Let's see here. The transform panel, I can try to rotate it to 0 degrees, and it leaves it that way with that bit of an angle to it. When I use the rotate tool, it moves this outer box's rotation, but the polygon inside is still rotated relative to the box. So that's like, okay. I don't know if that's a bug in the software or what, because I don't think there's anything I did to cause it to be skewed like that. Anyway, it's a bit of a head scratcher. Unless I was trying to put some text in that object that needed to align with an edge of it precisely, it probably wouldn't matter. Once it's cut out, you know, you can put it on something else with any rotation you want. And even if I put some text in here, it's such a small angular deviation that it maybe wouldn't even be visibly obvious that it's not exactly horizontal. I wanted to talk about filling a little bit more. I've got this object selected. That means I can use the context sensitive toolbar along here. And I already mentioned that the fill over here is selected with a crosshatch pattern, which means either no fill or a transparent fill, which is effectively the same thing. It does not mean that you're going to have a hatch pattern in there. However, you can fill an enclosed object, whether it's text or, you know, a geometrical object. You can fill it with a crosshatch or a checkerboard pattern or various things using the tools over here on the right. But using these tools up here, all you can do is select the fill, and this just means that there is no fill, or it's a fill of 0 color or transparent. And as I mentioned before, the fill color can be transparent, so you could have red but have it be kind of a transparency red, and I've already talked about that. A transparency of 0% is a solid color. A transparency of 100% is essentially completely transparent, and you can play with it and see how it comes out. And that's again done with the fill panel over on the right. On the bottom of the Cameo 5, and I imagine on the other models too, is this little hatch that says Bluetooth on it. And if you remove that screw, I bet we're going to find a conventional, off-the-shelf, generic Bluetooth dongle in there. Let's see. Yep, that's in there. And it pops right out. Alright, I have a long USB cable here. It has a normal USB-A connector on the left and a USB-B connector on the right. So a Type A and a Type B. This is the kinds you usually see on the back of printers. So you could just buy the Cameo doesn't come with a cable like this, but you can just go to any place that sells, you know, computer supplies, Office Max, Office Depot, Staples, any electronics store, you know, or Amazon, buy a USB cable with a Type A on one end and a Type B on the other. Okay, so the B connector plugs into the side of the Cameo there. And I'm going to turn it on. Sorry about the reflections. And then I'm just going to plug it into the front of my computer into one of the USB ports. And now in the software, I go over to the Send panel. I'm showing two different Cameos hooked up here. A 44D26 FAA and a C363 FD87, which is shown connecting up by USB instead of by Bluetooth, and that is the one I want to connect to. So I'll go down here to click that one, and now it's available and it wants me to load media. Alright, now into the print and cut part. Just a coda onto the video that I already did, because now we're starting to deal with the machine itself. Anyway, so I have this design, and because we're in the Send environment now, this Send tab up here, it's not the same as the design environment, but a lot of the same tools are available for zooming and so on. I've done a fill sheet here, so the entire sheet is full of these designs. And you can probably see that there's a red outline, that's a cut line, that's super thin. And then there's a green cut line just inside of that. And then there's the text, which is showing up really fat red at the moment. Now if I go back briefly to the design tool and zoom in on that, we can see it a little more clearly. There's the thin red line, that's a cut line. There's the thin green line, that's also a cut line, because this particular overlay design can be cut to have two different diameters. And I can select to cut on the red line or on the green line, and thereby get it to be two different diameters. Then there's two small circles that are brown. That's this one and this one. It may not really show up clearly as brown, but on the screen they're brown. And then the text is black. So we have four different colors there used in this design. And now I'm going to go back to the Send tab, and it's saying no media loaded, so I need to load the media. I previously, from the design software, I printed out this sheet. That's the print part of the print and cut. And you can see that it just printed out the text and nothing else. None of the cut lines printed out, because that's the way it works with a print and cut operation. I do have the registration marks at 3 corners, and I've just got it on this copy paper for the moment, just for this demonstration, because as I said before, the real thing will be clear plastic with white printing on it, and for that I'm going to have to also print it with black on white paper and paste. Just cut out the registration marks and paste those on top, otherwise the machine will never see those registration marks. That'll be a bit of a kludge, and I'm still kind of curious how it's going to turn out. Anyway, there's a bunch of lines here, starting with this one. They're raised lines, and the leftmost one, it actually has a little arrow there, but it's hard to see in the video. It's right by the tip of my finger. That's where you're supposed to align the left side of the mat. So I put it in there, aligning that. It doesn't have to be exact. That's what the registration marks are for. You just want to get it approximately there and put it in till it doesn't wiggle. The mat won't go in any further than this. And then I push this one button that has the up-facing arrow that is a load. See, I didn't have it in there all the way, so I got to back that out. I need to hold that in there while I'm pushing the button, so I'm going to have to put the camera down for a second. Okay, so it's loaded now. And this is an auto tool here, an auto blade they call it. On the older Cameos, you had to physically go in and turn a knob on there to set the blade height or the blade depth, depending how you look at it, for the type of material you're cutting. And that would be recommended in the software. Now the software still dictates that, but now with the auto blade, it actually moves this head over and puts the auto blade down into a tool that's right here, the slot, and it uses that to kind of ratchet it around. It basically does the adjustment for you. Anyway, so the media is loaded, and now up here where it said no media loaded or ready for media, different messages that could appear there. Now it says ready. Now I need to move to the type of cutting I'm going to do, but first I want to make sure that the copy paper right now is just normal 20-pound copy paper. It's going to be a cut operation. I've got an auto blade installed and it's detected. I don't need to modify anything else. I'm just going with the defaults for that type of media and type of blade. Now up here there's some tools where you can do this one. It looks like outlines of a circle and a square. That's for cutting the outlines. And then this one here is for cutting according to the fill color, and this one's according to cut to layer, but I'm going with the lines, so I'm going to click that one, and you can see over here that every place that's going to get cut is now bold-faced. And those little brown circles are now drawn with a bold line, and the outer circle, the red one, is shown with a bold line. The green line is shown, but it's not in heavy red. Only the things that are in heavy or thick red lines here are the ones that will be cut. So here's the colors that have been detected. The green, that's the inner cut line, but I have that selected off up here where the mouse pointer is. I'm not going to cut the green line. I'm not going to cut anything that's black, that's my text, so that's turned off. But the brown, this is brown, it probably looks black on the screen. I've got that selected to cut, so those little circles will cut out. And then the outer outline, that's the red, that one will also cut. So I've determined here and specified what I want to have cut out. And it just reminds me here that we're doing medium copy paper, 20-pound. We're going to be doing a cut operation. That's contrasted to other things. You can put pens in the tool holder and use this to draw with a pen, for example. But we're doing a cut operation. And we're using the auto blade, so it will automatically select the blade to the appropriate setting. I could override some of those things with the modify settings, but I'm not going to. And there's even more through the more button here, a lot of things you can mess with. So the only thing I need to do is click the send button here, and I'm going to do that. And it says please load your materials and tools into the Cameo, which I've done. It's just a friendly reminder. So now it pulls the material in and it's looking for the registration marks. Now it's looking for the one at the lower left. Now it's checking the one at the upper right. And from that it can get the positions of everything else exact. Now it's doing the adjust of the blade. And now it's cutting the little circles. And now the big circle. Now it's doing little circles and a big circle. that ratchety noise is normal. And they have a algorithm in here that figures out the least amount of movement of the media or the cutting mat and the print head, or cutting head rather. It traces the path of least resistance, the shortest distance that it has to move, so it cuts as fast as possible. They have a trade name for that, I forget what it is. But it's cutting pretty fast. And that should be the end of it. And it ejects the media to the load position again. Then I just have to push this down button here to unload it the rest of the way. These other 4 buttons are for making small movements of the cutting mat this way and the head this way, and that's useful for various additional operations that you might have to do. For example, you can tell the software to do a test cut, and it will do a cut in some place up near the top edge, and you might want to move the head out of the way so you can get in there and see if it really cut all the way through like it's supposed to, and if it did, then you can go ahead and have it do the actual print job or the cut job. And in order to do that, you might have to manipulate the position of the mat and the position of the head, just so you can see and or get at the little test cut up in this area. That's one thing that you might use those arrows for. You see this extra tool here, it looks like an arrow in a circular shape. That's the redo or do again. So if you're going to cut exactly the same design again, instead of commanding it from the software, you can just eject the mat, peel off your media, put new media on it, stick it back in, and hit that button, and it'll just automatically redo the cut that it just did. So that's just a shortcut. You could also command it from the software to do it, but that's what those are for. So now I'm going to unload the media, and it just shoots it right out of the machine. Now I have this toolkit that I had from like 12, 13 years ago, when I also owned a Cricut machine, and they had a nice selection of tools in a zipper bag that are useful for peeling things off the adhesive mat. I'm sure toolkits like this are still available. There's a little scissors and kind of just a thin edge spatula type of thing, and kind of a letter opener tool and a dentist pick with a little barb on it. That's useful for picking up small areas like perhaps these little cut circles. And there's a little chisel knife blade. It's like a little X-Acto knife blade of the chisel style. That's also useful for peeling up small and delicate areas from the adhesive mat. And this is yet another little spatula thing, but not quite so sharp. And then this little flapjack spatula is probably the most useful one. So I don't know if Silhouette sells something like this or not, but I'm sure that equivalent kits are still available. So I'm going to go through here and start peeling this up. I have to use 2 hands for this. Obviously this goes better when you've got 2 hands. Now if I was printing on plastic film or something with a little more body to it, like poster board or, you know, thin cardboard, this would be a little different. Probably come off easier than this relatively thin copy paper. The adhesive's fairly aggressive, and thin, fragile media like this, it tends to come off a little more problematically than the more substantial media that you might have cut on. But there is an example of how that came out. Now, I have to peel off those little circles, and just can demonstrate here how that would work. Actually, it's probably best to remove the actual overlays before I do these, and then just spatula those up, but I can remove them ahead of time. It's just a matter of kind of poking in to the media a little bit until it gets a purchase, and then kind of dragging it out of the way. Because it's cut out, it's not attached to the main parts. So you can see how I'm doing that. I've picked off all the small holes, so now it's just the actual overlays, which is the end result of this print and cut process. And even these little holes came out quite cleanly. I think it's a little better than my older machine could do with small things like that. Bigger images are usually no problem, it does those very clean, but the little swiveling knife blade in here when they have to do these very tight little cuts, I think they've improved that a little bit. So I'm going to use the spatula tool to get these off, just like scraping pancakes off of a skillet. So here's one of those. And again, you just have to imagine this being clear plastic with white printing on it to see the way it's eventually supposed to come out. But for demonstration purposes, this is a lot easier to visualize. Anyway, I won't show the rest of it.